Ever since I started posting videos on TikTok and YouTube, the question that I've received into my emails and Instagram direct messages the most is what tools do I need if I want to start doing the kind of woodworking you're doing here. So that's why I'm making this video today, to just run down the basic tools you need to start your woodworking journey. Now, I began my woodworking journey 2 summers ago. Basically, I wanted to build a wooden boat known as a curragh, and I didn't have any prior woodworking knowledge. Both my parents were accountants, so we didn't have any workshop or anything set up. So I had to go about learning from scratch. I also didn't have a whole pile of money to be buying all these fancy power tools with, so I took to the internet, car boot sales, auto jumbles, you name it. I was there and I was buying old saws, chisels, planes, whatever I could get my hands on. By the time I had the boat finished, I had absolutely fallen in love with the process of restoring these older tools. I also found that a lot of the older tools, especially the hand planes, were far superior in quality to the cheaper stuff you could buy nowadays. I should also mention I'm only going to be talking about hand tools in this video. I have a table saw and a chop saw down here, so I do have hand tools, but you can see now they haven't been used in a while. And that's because I believe if you're starting off with woodworking, it's a waste of money for you to be buying any fancy power tools. Everything you need you can do with tools that we've been using for generations and generations and are powered with no electricity, naught but elbow grease. Also, hand tools are cheaper, easier to maintain and fix, not as noisy, less dangerous, and just far more satisfying to use. So let's begin. We all have our vices, and this is the woodworkers. If you want to be working wood, you're going to need something to clamp that wood in place while you work it. Now, you can't go too far wrong with a vice. Just see what you can find out there. They'll screw and they'll tighten like that. And if you want to get real fancy, you can get one with a quick release, which means you can just press this fella in and move this fella forwards and backwards without having to do a whole load of this. So now that we have something to hold our wood into place, we're going to need something to mark it out before we can do anything to it. And for that, we're going to need a set of measuring and marking tools. Now, to actually physically mark out your wood, you can just use a humble pencil, or if you're feeling fancy, you can use a marking knife like this to scribe out your lines, or if you're trying to save yourself a bit of money and get a nice scribe, you can just use a Stanley knife like this fella here. Now, there's a whole pile of different squares you can get, from just the standard carpenter square here to a sliding square, big and small. They all do the same thing. It just depends how much money you're willing to spend and whether or not you need a big square or a small square for the type of work you're doing, but they all do the same thing, just mark at 90-degree angles on pieces of wood before you cut them. But you're not just going to be working with square angles, and that's why you should probably also pick yourself up a sliding bevel like this guy here. This allows us to pick an angle, lock it into place here with a screwdriver. A flathead screwdriver is also something you should add to your toolbox, by the way. But once we have an angle locked into place, we can hold it like that for the whole duration of the project, and we can just use that to translate the same angle onto whatever it is we're marking and then cutting. You might also want to pick yourself up a set of dividers like this fella here. Very useful for transferring measurements or just marking out the same measurement over and over again. And also a marking gauge. These are very easy to find, and basically you can just bring it up to your piece of wood and then mark the whole way along it, just like that. There's also more contemporary versions. Now, they are more expensive, but they do work slightly better, so I suppose it depends how much money you're willing to spend on it at the minute, but this is a tool you'll pretty much always have by your side. So with a few of them tools, you should be able to manage all the marking out you'll need to do at the beginning. Now let's get to the fun part, the cutting tools, more specifically chisels. Now, there's many types of different chisels you can get. For example, beveled edge chisels like these fellas here, mortising chisels like this huge fella here, and the small fellas up there, and also firmer chisels like this one here, which are kind of like our beveled edge chisels we were looking at earlier, except there's no bevel along the edge. Now, if you want to shop around, you can find lots of beautiful old chisels, good quality Sheffield steel that people are giving away for next to nothing. But if you don't have easy access to those, I would recommend you just buy a set of 4 chisels from either Stanley or Marples. Don't go off and buy yourself the cheapest set of chisels you can find. The steel in them will be incredibly soft and you will spend more time sharpening them than actually using them. But if you buy a decent set of beveled edge chisels, plastic handle ones are totally fine. They will do 90% of the things that you will require chisels to do when you're just starting out. So on the topic of chisels, you're going to need something to strike them with. You're going to need a mallet. Now, do not go off and buy yourself a mallet. If you can find one lying about the place already, that's great, use that. But you should always try make your own mallet. In my most recent video, I actually made this mallet from scratch using some scrap wood I had lying about the place, so I'll try link that below or at the end of the video. But you'll be much more proud of a mallet you made yourself than anyone that came out of a factory, and it's a great way to practice your woodworking skills. Now, people are always going to say, how are you going to make a mallet unless you have a mallet to make it in the first place? You can get by without it for the first one if you, let's say, use a hammer or a big heavy stick or something. So make your mallets. And now for my favourite tools of all, the noble hand plane. So there's a huge variety of hand planes to choose from, the biggest one I own being this number 8 jointer plane here at 2 feet long, all the way down to this Incy Wincy Stanley 101 here. Now the thing about very big and very small planes is that they're designed to do a few specific jobs very well. As a beginner, you're going to want one plane that can do lots of things fairly well, and that is why I pretty much exclusively recommend beginners start off with a Stanley number 5. Now you can still buy new number 5s, but the decent ones are a couple of £100, so I would recommend you go about and you find vintage planes. Now these are incredibly easy to fix up. I have another tutorial somewhere, but once you get these going, they're a very satisfying tool to use, and they're also incredibly useful. The number 5 is known as the jack plane after jack of all trades, and that's because you can tune it to do a variety of different jobs. You can kind of use it as a jointer plane to joint the edges of two boards together like the number 8 we were just looking at. You can also use it as a smoothing plane to take down boards and make them nice and smooth. Or you can increase the depth of the iron with the adjustment knob here and take off big fat shavings, and that'll allow you to prepare rough stock into usable finished wood in no time. As well as a bench plane like the number 5 we were just looking at, you might also want to pick yourself up a nice little block plane like this. Now these are also very easy to find second hand, and they're useful if you're just trying to add a nice chamfer on a piece very easily, or if you're trying to go over end grain. If you get these good and sharp, they're fantastic for that as well. So you could probably get by without it, but they're also a nice one to start off with. Now, not too distant from hand planes, another essential tool I would recommend you getting is a spoke shave. Now you can get metal ones, or if you're looking a bit older, you can get wooden ones. I find the wooden ones work better on green wood, which is wood that has just been cut down from the tree. The angle of the edge is slightly narrower, which makes it a bit better for slicing through the wet fibres. But the majority of woodworking you'll be doing will probably be with dry wood. So a Stanley 151 is probably your best bet. Shops still sell these, and although they're not the best spoke shaves in the world, I use them all the time, and they work pretty much grand. Now if you're ever working on a handle, like let's say for a mallet or anything like that, you're going to need a spoke shave to come along and round over all your edges. They're also incredibly useful if you're just trying to shave, let's say, a curved part of a chair leg or anything like that you're not able to do with the flat sole of a plane. A spoke shave will do that for you. Another important genre of tools you're going to have to worry about is saws. Now, this can be pretty daunting just because there's so many different types of saws, all serving different functions and uses, but I'm going to go over a brief number of saws that'll probably be able to do all the jobs you'll have to worry about as a beginner. The first saw we're going to look at, and in my opinion the most important, is the rip cut saw. Now this fella here is a rip cut saw, and generally speaking these saws are about 26 inches give or take. Now rip cut saws were the table saws of their time. Basically, if you want to rip down along the length of a piece of wood, you use your rip cut saw. Obviously if you can afford it and there's one lying around, just feed it through the table saw and away you go. But these fellas, they're very easy to find, they're abundant. You clean up the blade, you sharpen the teeth, and away you go again. If you get these, you're going to have to keep in mind that you're going to have to find a triangular file and learn to sharpen them. But once you get them going, there is nothing more satisfying than throwing a piece of wood up on a sawhorse and just powering your way through a big long length of wood. Now, as well as a rip cut saw, you're going to want to get a cross cut saw like this fella here. And the same way a rip cut saw cuts down along the grain, a cross cut saw cuts across the grain like this. Now these are both vintage saws, which means the teeth haven't been tempered, which means we can bring a file to them and sharpen them up the whole way down until eventually they start to shrink away into nothing. Like this is the same model of saw here, and you can see now one has a lot more length on the blade than the other, just because this one has been sharpened a lot more. You can buy modern saws with their plastic handles, which are far less comfortable to hold, but they will be much sharper. But once they go dull, you can't sharpen them, you just have to throw them out. And I really like the idea of holding onto a saw for a very, very long time. But I suppose if you did want the convenience of just having a nice sharp saw ready to go, you could just buy one from the store and use it until it doesn't work anymore. That's up to you. Another little saw that you're going to want to pick up is a coping saw. That's this fella here, and that is for just kind of cutting little curves and corners and details into it. As I've always said, you can't cope with them and you can't cope without them. As well, if you're ever cutting dovetails, these fellas are very good for kind of getting into all the awkward angles and just removing bits of wood. Now I have a little saw rack here with a few different tenon saws, carcass saws, you name it. It helps if you're doing small fine carpentry work. You could get a Gents saw like this for cutting dovetails. This is actually a dedicated dovetail saw, and you can see the handle is kind of in more of a pistol grip. It's a bit easier to hold, but it's all down to personal preferences. These are also fairly easy to find. It might be worth your while finding a nice tenon saw like that. Same story, you sharpen the teeth and it makes it a bit easier for fine joinery, but depends on the work you're doing, you might be able to get away without a few of these. Now the thing about these planes and chisels is that after a while of use they're going to get blunt, and now you're going to have to worry about sharpening them. For a large portion of recent history, oilstones like this fella were used, so you saturate them in oil and use the coarse side to sharpen away the primary bevel, and then you flip it around to the fine side, which you use for the very tip, and that gives you a nice very sharp edge. Now I don't use an oilstone all that much, because if we take another look at it, we can see that after a lot of use it kind of starts to curve inwards a small bit. Now it mightn't show up on video, but if I brought up a metal rule or something to this, you can see there's a load of light getting in underneath it. So if you do have an extra bit of cash lying about, I would recommend you get a diamond stone like this fella here. Exact same principle, there's a core side, 400 grit, and then you can flip it around to 1000 grit, and exact same principle. Either way, whichever one you decide to go with, once you're done, you're going to have to strop your edge, and basically that removes a tiny little bit of metal that's built up at the edge, and it also polishes it. A strop is just a bit of leather with the fluffy side facing upwards, and stropping compound or car polishing compound, whatever you want to use, cover it in that and then just rub your edge along it a few times, and before you know it you'll have an edge that is sharp enough to shave hairs right from your arms and do all the woodworking you need. I do have another video where I go into a load of detail on sharpening, so I'll link that one as well. That's a good one to check out. So finally, I've saved the boring tools for the bitter end. So the tools you need to cut holes in your wood. We'll start with a hand crank drill just like this. It's essentially a cordless power drill, except the power comes from your hand. Another cool feature is that some of them, you can unscrew the handle and you can store all your bits there. So we'll pull out a bit there now, pull out our vise here and slam her home. And just like that, we can use our hand crank drill to drill little holes inside of the wood. Now obviously this can't cut any seriously massive holes because you're just not going to get enough torque. So to bore out the bigger holes, you're going to need a brace and a bit. So I have a big bit on the end of it here, and we're going to use the hole we just drilled as our pilot hole here. We're going to set it up and just twist like that, and if the bit is nice and sharp, we should be able to just bore a nice clean hole the whole way through the timber. As well, you can get bits to put at the end of your brace and bit that will allow you to screw screws into wood. See, for example, this fella here now, we can just pop this in and out. We have a screw, and we're just going to plop them into place, line her up, and just start drilling. So there we go, lads. I think that pretty much sums up all the tools you need to begin your woodworking journey. You can do a lot with the tools in this video, and you can get by without some of them, but not all of them. Pick and choose. The best thing I would recommend you do is pick a project. I recently made a mallet. Go try that and pick out the tools you need to make it, and as you do more projects down the line, start picking up more tools as you go on. Just because I'm shying away from using power tools, it doesn't mean everyone has to. I do use them occasionally, but I try and encourage the use of hand tools and traditional methods where possible, simply because I like them. I also encourage people to find older tools, fix them up, ask your family, ask old people, go find some old tools. The quality that some of that stuff was built is just unbelievable, and it's great if you can get that going and give it a new life. But with that being said, I would like to do more videos down the line where I delve into more depth about all the tools. Obviously I'm trying to make this video as short and sweet as possible, so I just kind of have to gloss over nearly everything and essentially make a list video. But with that said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Good luck.